Welcome to the Duck Dive. Today we're looking at that little Tamiya part. You know the one.
Ah, yes, the motor mount disc.
Yeah.
Part number 4305125.
Exactly. People call it the cardboard disc. You see it in old kits like the Frog, anything with that rear 540 motor.
Right, it comes standard in a lot of those.
So the big question we got is, if you upgrade your motor, maybe a sport-tuned, torque-tuned, something like that, do you still need this disc?
It's a really common question, actually.
Our mission today, get you a clear, evidence-based answer, especially if you're, past the beginner stage.
Okay, let's jump in. So part 4305125. It's this thin, pressed fiber sheet, about 0.6 millimeters thick.
Pretty thin. So what's it actually doing there?
Its main job, really, is to act as a gearbox seal, or maybe better put, a dust shield.
A seal? How so?
Well, think about those brushed motors like the standard 540 or even the tuned ones. They have cooling vents on the end bell, right?
Yeah, the little slots near the back.
Exactly. As the motor spins, especially the armature inside, it can act like a tiny fan, potentially drawing air in through those vents.
Ah, so it could suck in dust and dirt.
Precisely. Dust, dirt, sand, grit, whatever's flying around. This disc sits between the motor end bell and the gearbox casing.
Acting as a barrier.
Yep. It helps block that path, stopping contaminants from getting sucked straight into your gearbox internals via the motor.
Makes sense. I've heard some people say their gears wore out faster when they left it off.
That tracks. Grit inside the gearbox is obviously bad news for gear life.
Any other functions? People sometimes mention heat shielding or keeping grease in.
Yeah, you hear that sometimes. Honestly, heat shielding is probably minimal. It's so thin, it's likely just going to heat up with the motor.
Not really an insulator then.
Not significantly, no. And grease containment. Maybe a tiny bit, but the primary intended function is definitely keeping dirt out.
Okay. And I think there's metal versions sometimes. Part 430557.
There is, yeah, for certain models. That kind of suggests the fiber one is usually good enough, but maybe some specific applications benefit from a more rigid metal seal.
Gotcha. Now let's talk upgrades. Motors like the sport-tuned, torque-tuned, GT-tuned. How do they compare physically to the stock 540? Does that change things?
Yeah, it's a key point. Physically, they're the same 540 size, same diameter, same length, same mounting holes. They bolt right in.
So the disc fits just the same?
Exactly. The difference is internal performance, more RPM, more torque. You know the deal.
Which usually means they run hotter.
Right.
And spin faster.
Generally, yes.
Right.
They work harder, generate more heat, higher RPMs. But crucially, they still have those cooling vents on the end bell, just like the stock motor.
So the risk of sucking in debris is still there, maybe even higher with faster spinning.
Potentially, yeah. The fundamental reason for the seal remains.
Okay, so physically compatible, still needs sealing. What about installation? Stock kits like the Frog show it used with the standard plastic motor mounts.
Correct. That's the default setup.
But the upgrade motors themselves, they don't come with a new disc, do they?
No, they don't. The assumption is either you reuse the original one, or perhaps you're using a different mounting solution altogether.
Ah, like an aftermarket aluminum mount. That seems common with upgrades.
Right, and this is where it gets interesting, and where opinions sometimes differ. The material of the motor mount itself plays a big role.
How so?
With the standard plastic mounts, the consensus is pretty clear. Use the disc, you need that seal.
For the dust protection we talked about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with metal mounts, especially aluminum ones, which often double as heat sinks.
Ah, the goal there is cooling, right? To pull heat away from the hotter upgrade motor.
Precisely. And that thin fiber disc sitting between the hot motor end bell and the metal heatsink mount, it acts as a thermal barrier, an insulator.
So it would actually hinder the cooling effect of the metal mount.
Correct. It slows down the heat transfer from the motor to the mount. So the common practice when using a metal or aluminum heatsink mount is to omit the disc.
To maximize that heat dissipation.
Yeah. Let the motor make direct contact or near direct contact with the metal mount for the best cooling.
Okay, so plastic mount, keep the disc for sealing. Metal mount, ditch the disc for cooling. Seems straightforward. But what if you run off-road a lot, like with the Frog?
That's the trade-off. The Frog's ORV chassis, its gearbox, is somewhat exposed and known to be a bit susceptible to grit getting in. Sealing is arguably more important there.
So you ditch the seal for cooling with a metal mount, but now your vulnerable gearbox is even more exposed to dirt ingress right through the motor vents.
That's the dilemma. Community wisdom generally follows the plastic metal rule. Plastic mount, definitely use the disc, especially off-road. Metal mount, prioritize cooling, leave it off.
But what do people do about the sealing issue with metal mounts then? Just accept the risk?
Some do. Others might try alternative sealing methods like carefully applying tape around the motor gearbox joint after mounting if they're really concerned about dust with a metal mount.
Okay. I remember seeing a discussion about a DTO2 heatsink where someone suggested a specific order, like motor, then an aluminum spacer, then the cardboard disc, then the gearbox case, trying to get best of both.
Yeah, people experiment. Trying to balance sealing and cooling can get complex depending on the specific chassis and mount.
So let's break down the consequences. What's the real risk of omitting the disc, say, with an upgraded motor in a Frog using the stock plastic mount?
Big risk is gearbox contamination.
Hmm.
Grit gets in, grinds away at your gears, especially the diff gears, accelerated wear, potential failure. Plus, the motor itself could ingest debris, reducing its performance and lifespan.
And what about using the disc with a metal heatsink mount?
The main implication there is reduced cooling efficiency. Your upgraded motor might run hotter than it could, potentially shortening its life or hurting performance, especially on long runs.
Does the disc's thickness, that 0.6 millimeter, affect gear mesh at all?
Directly.
Hmm.
Probably negligible. It's very thin.
Hmm.
The indirect impact comes if you omit it and debris gets in, causing wear that then affects mesh over time.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. That little cardboard disc, it's not mechanically essential just to bolt an upgraded 540 motor in, right?
Correct. The motor will physically mount without it.
But its protective function as a seal against dirt is crucial.
Absolutely paramount, especially if you're using the standard plastic motor mounts. In that case, using the disc is highly recommended.
And with metal or aluminum heatsink mounts.
Then you need to weigh things up. The common advice is to consider omitting it to maximize cooling for those hotter motors.
But with a big caveat about potentially letting more dirt into the gearbox, particularly in vulnerable chassis or dusty conditions.
Exactly. So the actionable advice seems to be plastic mount, use the disc, metal heatsink mount, probably omit the disc for cooling, but be mindful of sealing, maybe look into tape or just accept the risk depending on where you run.
And always double check things like gear mesh after any motor change, make sure it's secure, and definitely keep an eye on motor temperatures, especially with upgrades.
Good practice, definitely.
So a final thought for everyone listening. Think about where you actually run your RC car most often. Is it clean pavement, indoor carpet? Or is it the local park, dusty track, the beach?
Yeah, understanding your typical operating environment is key. That'll help you decide where you fall on that trade-off between getting the absolute best cooling for your motor and giving your gearbox the best protection from the elements. That balance is really the core of the decision about using or not using that little fiber disc.